Oh yeah, that to chenam tine.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for coming. We will begin by adjusting the motivation and reciting Gaden Lagema, and then from there we will begin with the class. Okay, we know at the very beginning, the first activity that we do is to adjust the motivation. Adjusting the motivation is something which is considered to be very important in all Buddhist activities, because the motivation is the way that we think, and the way that we think, it determines whether our mind will turn into Dharma or not. Therefore, adjusting the motivation at the beginning is of paramount importance, no matter what activity you engage. So obviously, there are many ways to adjust the motivation, and there are ways that you can do it that are very detailed and very elaborate, and we can go through many stages of adjusting the motivation. However, if we were to do this, it would take a long time, and we don't have so much time. So the way that we adjust the motivation is by reciting the verse for refuge and bodhicitta. So at that point, we have the opportunity to adjust the motivation and set it according to the precious mind of bodhicitta. And then after this verse, we recite the 100 deities, Gaden Lagema. And the reason why we do this is because it gives us an opportunity to accumulate merit and, of course, purify negativity. The truth is that we always need to accumulate merit, but we are all very busy with activities, we have responsibilities, we have to go to work. So actually, time becomes very constrained, very rare. We don't have much time, much opportunity to accumulate virtue. However, we have set these couple of hours aside for this class, and that gives us the opportunity, at least at the beginning of the class, to recite Gaden Lagema, and in this way accumulate, build up our merit, purify negativity. So that's the reason why we do these recitations at the beginning of the class.
Oda di inzang anzu kazang ane sem singi kante chiyores, sheba singi kante chiyores, dan di ki ngoto sinamindu, sheba di yogo tang, yulu yudang rijitang, dige ko le sheba re. Chasa sheba inzang anzu, ta zo zo, luri tang di se di she de di, kari ki tonda le she gu yore, kari ki tonda le di chi gu yores, di chi haku gu ruwa, haku gu yoba inzang, lui namsha sigindi ane yabuji ha mogona ane ngaranzo karasogure pangja kandeji pangu yume topja kandeji topgu yume tupja kandeji lengu yume andige sheda kala khakbo shira yore andige kala khakbo shira yore cheza di zang dinde gi namyeji yabuji ha go ya ge chidula ane tazo semyang ta nezu di higu yore shebe nezu di higu yorwa odi inzang luris tang di seyazo zo gare semgam rigba sonde jirwa semgam rigba gi namsha jirwa nambe gi semgam rigba namsha re o jazan dige ane tangaranzo la semrji yobar jida changme gi ke lengwa ya jidang ji nyongwe thone dubko ya jirema do nyongwe thone dub yongdu gala 아니 용에 돈을 줍고 해야 그 가이 받일라 민세기 릭베 줍고 해요 말에 좀 먹어야 가르서는 디 소소로 용구도 와서 용화 다가란 게 하고도 와서 어떻게 인자 릭베 줍고 해요 말에서 지상 알아서 줄라 셰바스기지 여바디 아니 다 용에 줍어 인자 아니 민세 줍고 해서 요 말에 가산의 슈베 임바 어디래 디 All right,
so last week we start talking about mind and awareness and how important it is to understand it. And first of all, to understand really how it exists, the nature of the mind, the nature of awareness. And in Tibetan Buddhism, the subject matter that is dealing with this is Lorig, mind and awareness. You could say that Lorig is actually the Buddhist psychology. right? It deals with everything within the mind. The thing is that there are many things that we need to abandon. There are many things that we should adopt as our objects of practice. But if we don't understand the presentation of the mind, if we don't understand the nature of the mind, we will not be able to clearly understand this division, this classification of what we practice and what we abandon. The fact is that we all possess mind, we all possess awareness, and actually it is through our own experience that we know that it exists. We don't necessarily need to apply any logical reasoning, any path of logic to establish that the mind exists. We know that it exists from our experience.
세상 말한조 소소 교육의 심 사지 당 셰바생지 여바다 하다 고유orde 셰바디던 디기 남샤 칸데 인다 맨 십신차와 하고야디 아니 베만신 칼레 하고 싫어 임바레 소제 남지 안에 런유기 심 사지 여러바 어디 심 예네당 아니 십신차와 사디 베만시 제주제 하고 칸데 지를 인나 삼삼게 심지 여바데 하고 요orde 심디 칸트리 지면 십시 타와 셰디 또스 베마스 카보 임바데스.
We, as I said, we all know that we have awareness. However, to understand the presentation, the classification of awareness in great detail and with, with all the divisions and so forth, this is something which is extremely difficult for us, ordinary people. Okay, so as I say, because it is so difficult to understand the presentation of the mind, if we have an account in the life of Geshe Milarepa. So a shepherd one day came up and asked him this question. He said, within one house, you could have one person or you could have many people. So what is the case with our body? Within our body, do we have one mind or do we have many minds? And Geshe Milarepa didn't give a definitive answer like we have one mind or we have many minds and so forth. He turned back and he said, you check, you examine.
제상 나란조 카시에게 가르라고 요르스도 갈라 나란조 강바지기 나로라야 로 파르샤이나 로 셰도직 파르샤베이나 로 디게 왜 고네만 튕그리 기군네만 기군 가서 가려나 가서 가는 왜 튕고 요르와 디낭시 요레스 라빈 요르 딘데레스 제상 셈직마도 요 마레스 데밍네만 다두갈라 폴라 미히스 밍다 나구니 데만노미연도 갈라 나시에스 요레스 암조네 yen도 갈라 나시에스 다가 오도스체는 밍다바레 마도바 셈망보가 요 말 셈직마도 요 마레스 딘데라고 요레 안페나 강바지나 로 바르온도 갈라 로 기군소소당 딘데네야 왜 잡아다 직바레스 어디네라고 요레스.
Okay, so there are some who say it is like this. They give the analogy. They say, imagine you have a house. The house has a door and it has many windows. Now you have only one light in this house, but when you turn on the light in this house, the light actually comes out of every window and the light comes out of the opening of the door. So they say the mind is like this. We have one mind, but at times it experiences things through the eyes, in which case we talk about eye awareness. At times it experiences things through the nose, in which case we say we have nose awareness. At times it experiences things through the ears, in which case we say we have ear awareness. So they say it's like one mind experiencing through different openings, just like the light from one lamp in one house can escape from the house through the doors and the windows. So, going back to the story with the shepherd who went and asked Geshe Milarepa, and Geshe Milarepa told him, I'm not giving you an answer, you go and examine for yourself. So he went and examined, and then he returned. And he said, it's really very strange. It seems that there is only one mind, but it is very difficult to define it. So he says, if you try to grasp it, you cannot grasp it. If you try to suppress it, you cannot suppress it. If you try to make it come here and abide, stay here, it doesn't stay here. If you try to send it somewhere else, it doesn't go. If you try to look at it, perceive it with the eyes, there is nothing to see. If it seems that it is changeable all the time, it is shifting and it's moving. And at times when you think the mind does not exist, then it makes its presence very obvious, like, yes, it exists. So he was just saying that it is very difficult to define it. It is very difficult to grasp it, to see it, to understand it, to discipline the mind, and so forth. And Geshe was saying, I think that if we analyze, this would also be, we would almost also have very similar experience. Things, it's like this with the mind. You cannot grasp it, you cannot stop it, you cannot send it, you cannot make it stay, something like that. Anyway, so that man went away and further examined the mind, and then he came back and reported his further findings. So what he said is something which is, it moves, it is changeable, it is limpid, it is clear, it is not seen. And when he says it is not seen, of course, we have ways of perceiving the mind, but what he means there is it is not directly seen by the eyes. Why? Because he said it has no color, it has no shape. So if it has no color and no shape, it cannot be seen by the eyes. And then he says, when I look somewhere, so when I direct my eyes to look in that direction, it seems that the mind also goes there. When I walk, it seems that the mind is walking with me. It's with every breath, it seems that it comes. And it seems that my body is always the servant that obeys the mind. So this is what the man reported, and it is up to us also to examine whether that is the case. We say that it doesn't have color and it doesn't have shape, and therefore it's not something that is perceived by the eyes. It's not something that is perceived by the senses. Actually, if it were perceived by the eyes or some other sense awareness, then the discussion would be very short. We wouldn't have anything to talk about, right? Because you could directly see it. So you wouldn't need to talk about it so much. And then he said, we say that if the mind had color and shape, it would be something that our eyes could directly perceive. But the thing is, if we could directly see the mind, then harmony would be destroyed. And what he said by this is that if actually you could see the mind of other people, if you could see what other people were actually thinking, all this politeness that we have, all these assumptions of, goodwill would be destroyed, and that would be a bit of a shock. So he says, actually, it's a good thing we cannot see the mind with our eyes.
Jason Simgi Denayang Lunga Namju Matu Begoya Ring Anazol Mabushu Jilegu Yorua. That means the Condo shoes and Namjur Condo say Namjur Madembaje Subsub Shoe Chegoya. Diane Chikani Jagzi Sim Nanglo Nejagzi in Bahaku Gugila Yang Jajan Jiburji Sheje Sobda Soje. Takanda Jan Nanglo Namjudi Chilola Tuyo Maris. Jason Nanglo Namjudi Chilo Toyong Baina and Zambulin Yoramucha Yoris. What it is.
And then he said, and whatever we have within our own mind, we exercise great effort to control our external behavior so that we will not reveal this. So, for example, we might be very angry, but with our physical expression, we try to maintain the appearance of being calm. And with our speech, although we're angry inside, we try to moderate the speech. So it said, if we were to openly show the state of our mind, there would be many problems. So as you can see here, we are searching, we are investigating, we try to understand, to recognize the mind, and we're coming closer, but actually we don't have any definitive description, right? We're trying to find, it's like this or it's like that. Now, the interesting thing about the mind is that the mind is full of conceptual thoughts. They make this analogy that the conceptual thoughts that run through the mind are as many as the dust particles that you notice on the rays of the sun. So, when the rays of the sun do not enter the room, you just think there are no dust particles. But once the rays of the sun come in, you can actually see the dust particles on the rays of the sun. And they are countless, aren't they? So it is like this. Within our own mind, we run constant and endless conceptual thoughts. And the presence of that conceptual thoughts doesn't depend on whether there is an object or not. The object might be there. We have conceptual thoughts. The object might not be there. It doesn't matter. We still have conceptual thoughts all the time. So it is like this. If you tried to count how many thoughts you had from this morning until this time of the day, you would be lost. You wouldn't be able to calculate that, because the mind just very quickly, within very short time, it just moves to the next thought, to the next thought, to the next thought. So this is common for all of us. We all have this experience. So because this appears to be the nature of the mind, it's actually very hard to discipline, to tame the mind. The whole purpose of our study, of our practice, is so that we can tame, we can discipline the mind. They say the mind is like a mad cow. All right, so imagine that you have to deal with a mad cow. It will be very difficult to restrain it. It will be moving in an unpredictable manner with quite a lot of force. You will have to use ropes or even chains. And even then, it will be very difficult to kind of like discipline or gain control of a crazed animal, isn't it? So it is like this with our mind as well. It's extremely difficult to keep it disciplined. So we have a description of the mind that actually explains why it is so difficult to discipline. So it says, since it shifts and moves very quickly, it's easy to make mistakes, and therefore it's difficult to discipline. Because it is difficult to control or to restrain, many mistakes arise. And those who possess the mind must make the effort to improve it. And the mind, when the mind becomes improved or better, when it becomes lighter, wherever you want to send it, it will reach there. So it is advice here for us to recognize how difficult it is to control the mind. Okay, so we also have other advice from other texts where it says, this mad cow of, or this mad elephant, you could say the mad elephant of the mind enters the wrong path. So we know this, the mind is totally undisciplined and will go here and there. So imagine an elephant that is crazy and is out of control. It just moves in a very unpredictable way. Therefore, it says, you should certainly tie it on the stable pillar of your focal object. Use the rope of recollection and the iron hook of wisdom. So he's giving advice here that unless you tie the mind with a rope of recollection and conscientiousness on a very steady pillar of a focal object, you will not be able to discipline. It will be like a crazy elephant. Okay. Also, in the great commentary of the Bodhisattva's Ways of Life, almost exactly the same verse appears. It talks about the crazy elephant of the mind that we need to tie on the pillar of the focal object. So we can see, we have already seen the analogy of the mind being like the crazy elephant that is very strong and very difficult to discipline. There is another analogy, and he says the mind does not have any discipline. And in that sense, it is like a monkey that does not stay. You know, a monkey doesn't stay. The monkey constantly moves. It jumps from one branch to the next. It goes from one tree to the other, up and down all the time. It is this analogy of the monkey is actually given in the Paranirvana Sutra, where it says the nature of the mind is similar to the monkey that takes one after the other. So takes one after the other describes this activity of the monkey that goes from one branch to the next, right? So it similarly, it says our mind takes one object after the other, from visual forms to taste to odors to sounds to tactile objects and so forth. We seem to be taking and taking and taking. Constantly the mind, with attachment, moves from one type of object to the next. We have a presentation of that in the 12 links, in the link of taking or grasping, which actually has an image there of a monkey that goes from tree to tree and collects fruit, but it collects fruit indiscriminately because the fruit that it collects are unripe. So it just plucks the fruit, it takes the fruit and it leaves it there, and takes another fruit and leaves it there, takes another fruit and leaves it there. So there's this constant consumption from one object to the other. The mind is never satiated, never satisfied. And in this way, we also create this habituation, again, to repeat that thing in the future, take, take, take. So it continues by explaining that such problems, great problems, arise to us because of the fact that we're not capable of disciplining the anger. So you see, we have attachment towards visual forms, and that brings problems in sickness. We have attachment towards anger, and that again becomes the cause to bring about sickness. Therefore, to make the effort to discipline the mind is something which is very meaningful. If you can discipline the mind becomes like a wish-fulfilling jewel. A wish-fulfilling jewel, it means it is something that can provide you with everything you wish for. You will be totally protected. There will not be any harm from the outside. There will not be any harm from the inside. And all your needs, whether they are immediate, temporary needs, or whether they are ultimate needs in the future, all of this will be fulfilled. In terms of happiness, we have two types of happiness or well-being. We have the physical one and we have the mental. If you compare these two, compared to physical happiness and well-being, the mental happiness and well-being is superior and it's more important. So if you discipline the mind, you will get that mental happiness. Again, in terms of suffering, we have physical suffering and we have mental suffering. And when we compare these two, we find that the mental suffering is much more difficult to deal with. With physical suffering, we always have some medicine, some treatment, some band-aid you can put. But when you're suffering with the mind, you really need to do certain practices. You need to already be trained to implement the practices and the instruction, and that is quite difficult. Therefore, you can see that it is very important to discipline the mind. And this is the advice that we're given. So, of course, there are people who can give a little bit of advice to others when others are like very upset, or when others are very depressed. Of course, there are people who can give some advice. However, who is the one who can give advice when the mind has become crazy due to attachment, when the mind has become crazy due to hatred and so forth? Only the Buddha gives this advice. And the advice is that you have to discipline your own mind. You have to take control of the situation and change your mind. It is not the case that someone else can change the mind of other people. If it were like this, it would be very easy. But it's not like this. You have to discipline your own mind. So then it continues with a description of our teacher, Buddha Shakyamuni, where he says, if we look at our teacher never engaged in a battle. He never bears arms. He is not supported by an army behind him. And yet, even if all the unruly beings were to rise as enemies to him, he would constantly remain in the concentration on love. By remaining absorbed in the concentration of love, his body and mind remain immovable, right, like the mountain, and yet he totally defeats the host of Maras. So it's a description here of how the Buddha is victorious because he has totally controlled his mind. So the Buddha is not victorious because he's carrying different types of weapons and spears and so forth. He's not victorious because he has an army of supporters. And even when unruly beings are those who cause a lot of harm, a lot of trouble, and the whole earth is filled with them, isn't it? So even all the unruly beings were to rise as an enemy, he doesn't move. He just remains in this concentration of love. So his ultimate weapon is concentration on love. This is how he conquers. So just as he conquers and wins the battles without need to carry any weapons through disciplining his mind, similarly, if we want to achieve something, we have to discipline our mind. So as you can see here, we have a great description of the benefits of disciplining and controlling the mind. Also, Lama Tsongkhapa in the 3rd chapter, he's praising the Buddha, and he says, without holding any weapons or arms in your hands, you alone, entering in concentration, you were able to defeat the Maras. Who else other than you can obtain such victory without holding weapons? Also, Mahasiddha Saraha, he's saying, the mind is like the seed of everything. You can establish existence. Existence here means cyclic existence. You can establish the nirvana of Buddhahood through the mind. It is like the wish-fulfilling jewel that gives you all types of desired results. Therefore, to the mind are prostrate. So you can see very similar meaning. Also, the great master Dharmakirti in the 2nd chapter of the root of Namdrel, it describes the Buddha's mind, and he says the mind of the Buddha has a quality towards all, always abides in great equanimity. So to the point that if someone on one side of the Buddha were to anoint his body with sandalwood oil, and another person on the other side of his body were to attack him and cut his flesh with the blade of an axe, the Buddha, completely free from attachment, still remains in the great equanimity, treating both of these individuals in exactly the same way. So how come the Buddha's mind has obtained this level of perfect equanimity? Obviously, if someone were to attack us with an axe, cutting off pieces of our flesh, we would experience a lot of suffering, isn't it? There is pain, there is suffering, there is mental anxiety, and so forth. But because the Buddha has totally disciplined his mind, there is no pain, there is no anxiety. He remains in perfect equanimity. So if you can properly discipline the mind, the thing is that you will not be harmed at all. There will not be any external harm from humans and non-humans. We have an account from Master Milarepa when he was in retreat. Because his mind was so disciplined, he did not have fear and did not receive any harm. So there were those malevolent spirits, and one of them manifested in the aspect of a mouse, and he came riding a hare, a rabbit, and he was holding different weapons in the little mice hands, and he appeared in this aspect to give a fright, to scare Milarepa. But Milarepa was not afraid at all. He looked at this when it arrived and he just laughed. And so that spirit said, well, what is this? I came here to frighten you, but you're laughing. So if this is the case, I'm going to go. And he left, right? So he wasn't harmed. Why? Because he had a totally disciplined mind. Also, the great master Shantideva has said, do not worry about the tigers, the lions, the elephants, the snakes, the guardians of the hills, the cannibals, and so forth. You don't need to stop them. You don't need to bind them. If you bind your mind, you will bind all of them. If you discipline your mind, you will discipline all of them. Now, although we have a direct reference here of some quite scary animals or, scary beings here, we know that, for example, when we make the prayers to Tara and we request protection from the 8 types of fear, those animals are symbolic of various afflictions. So, for example, the tigers and the lions, they represent pride. The snake represent jealousy and so forth. And then we have the cannibals and so forth. They are all symbolic, right? So you don't worry about disciplining or stopping or tying up, restricting those things. The only thing you have to restrict is your mind. The only thing you have to discipline is your mind. And everything else will be taken care of. Also, in the great commentary of Bodhisattva's Ways of Life, it says, this world is full of those who cause you harm. It is impossible for you to defeat them since there are so many. If you can defeat your angry mind, you will not become angry towards them and they will not harm and retaliate. So disciplining pacifying your mind is the same as pacifying all of them. Bodhisattva's Ways of Life has this verse that says, the entire earth is covered with thorns. Where could you find enough leather to cover all of them? It's best if you cover the soles of your feet with leather, all right? So the thorns are found all over the earth. You cannot, if you want to protect your feet, it is better to put some rubber or some leather under the soles of your feet. In this way, everywhere you go, you will be protected. So if you look around you, the number of people or living beings that make you angry are endless. You could never get rid of all of them, right? It's much better if you discipline your mind so that you don't become angry towards them. So we talked about mental happiness, and we said this is the best type of happiness. We talked about mental suffering, and we said this is the worst type of suffering. So what methods do we have to deal with those things? There are many methods, and the best one is just to discipline your mind. So the Buddha, who realizes all phenomena that exist, has examined this and has found that the permanent or stable happiness is not established through external material objects and is not established through some small austerities of the body. these days we live in an era where so many substances have been developed, such as, for example, atomic weapons. And those who develop them, they say that they need to have atomic bombs or atomic weapons for the sake of peace, to protect their army, to protect the country, to protect the people of this country. However, these substances, we know very well that instead of becoming the causes for establishing peace, actually bring about death. If you are in a situation where you have to employ atomic weapons, it means you have to go to war. And when you go to war, people die. So you say that you have developed these substances to protect life, to protect everyone, but actually you cannot protect life. People will die. So peace does not come through external material progress and substances, and peace does not come through atomic weapons. So there is all this effort to develop, as we say, new substances, new types of machines, and all of this is for the sake of protecting the country, protecting the people, protecting the army. However, all those substances and all machines and the means who are supposed to protect us from harm actually create the harm. They are the ones who cause the harm. So if you look at the advice that the Buddha has given, the Buddha never said that you will achieve peace if you develop externally, materially, if you develop, atomic arsenal. The Buddha said you will obtain peace when you discipline the mind. That's the best advice. Okay, so it is like this, if you look at all the sutras and all the treatises and the commentaries, all the teachings that are given for the same reason. They're given for the sake of disciplining the mind. There is nothing that is included in the sutras and the treatises that is not for this particular purpose. So if we have to discipline the mind, we must come to understand what method, what means do we have for bringing this about. And the method of bringing this about is to actually study Lorig, study mind and awareness. There we find this presentation of mind and mental factors. And within this, we will be able to identify that there are some positive types of mind and there are some negative types of mind. When you come to understand what is positive mind, what is negative mind, then you can choose to cultivate, to invite all the positive states of minds. You can choose to eliminate, to get rid of, and stop the negative states of mind. And this is the means, or this is the path that gradually brings you to mental happiness, to well-being, to peace. There's no other way. We have to come to understand this, the different types of mind. So whether you call it Lorig or whatever you call it, this is the importance of this subject. Okay, so Geshe says, I would like to stop here for tonight. Okay, let's do the short mandala offering.